I was vomiting blood every morning in the shower, and that started freaking me out. So the only way I could get through the day and actually be able to go to work and function on calls during the day was to rig up a system with a mason jar and a lid and a hole punched in the mason jar with a straw, so I could have a bourbon on ice in the shower to chill me out enough that I could function during the day, so that then I can start drinking, because I'd like throw up in the shower and I'd get upset that I was sick and that I was going to die. And the only way that I could make those feelings go away was to pour more alcohol on them.
Warning. This episode contains a real conversation about addiction, drug use,
and suicide.
It may be triggering. Take care of yourself.
Listener discretion is advised.
This is the Sober Tapes. Raw stories of addiction, recovery, and the fight to live sober. Let's roll the tape. Okay, so tell us your name and your sobriety date, if you feel comfortable doing so.
Paul I, May 9th, 2022.
Tell us a little bit about Paul.
So for more than 50 years, I didn't have a problem with alcohol. Alcohol was my best friend. Alcohol was the answer. I grew up in pretty Leave It to Beaver household. Mom, dad have a younger brother, younger sister. Grew up in Mississauga. Everything was good. There was always we had a pool when I was growing up, and we were the neighborhood party house. So there was always pool parties and barbecues and things in our backyard in the neighborhood. And my brother and I were often roped in to be the bartenders at the barbecue, and we were very quickly learned that the stronger we made the drinks, the more fun the antics that ensued over the course of the evening took place. And so so alcohol was associated with fun and good times for me. I started drinking in high school, and booze was great. It made me more confident with girls. It made me more fun to be around. It made me funnier. It made the jokes funnier. And there were no consequences. I remember when I came into the rooms, I was what people called a high bottom alcoholic, right? There were no DUIs, no arrests. I can literally count on two hands the number of times that I was seriously hungover. Never blacked out until the very, very end. Booze was great, and I always sort of there were never any consequences. Went to university, drank a lot in university, but while everybody else was sleeping it off, I was in the library at 7:00 in the morning. I was ready to go. I was sort of somehow blessed with an ability to always bounce back. And so for the longest time, I thought, alcohol and I got along just great, because there was never a problem and there were never any negative consequences, until sort of after I got north of 50, and then things changed very rapidly to the other side, and I started to pay some of those consequences. But for the longest time, booze was perfect.
So you're saying from university time, you started drinking in high school until you started feeling some real consequences at about 50. Alcohol and drugs were just fun for you.
They were just fun. So there was no, in fact, they were, they were kind of part of my persona. I had a nickname, with the sort of the friends I hang out with, that sort of, people who know me, used to call me the Bear, or many still do. A lot of them still actually don't know my real name. And yeah, I was lucky enough at work that I had an expense account. which meant I was always available to pay for booze and pay for drinks and pay for food. And so I very quickly found out that if you were paying for things, you could be surrounded by people, and you could be surrounded by good-looking women, and you could be surrounded by a whole lot of fun and frivolity, and you just had to pick up the tab at the end of the night, and that was okay. Like it was just a sort of good time after good time, and things were great. Looking back, I think that there were some dark clouds on the horizon, but I was ignoring them. A lot of things that sort of really sort of had coalesced and arrived in my 50s. You started to see the early signs, but I just ignored a lot of those early warning signs, and just sort of blew through them, because back then I was using, and I was using alcohol and other things in my life to cover up the feelings that I had around feeling inadequate, feeling unhappy with myself. Still have voices in my head. I call them the pixies, that tell me that I'm not good enough, I'm not funny enough, I'm not smart enough. There are other people smarter than me at work. There are other people who are better than me. And the only way that those voices went away is if I covered them up with alcohol and other things. I struggled with a problem with food. I struggled with all kinds of other things. Alcohol just being kind of the latest, and sort of more prevalent one of those, in terms of just like trying to bury my feelings so I didn't have to deal with them.
At what point did it become a problem? Like, you talked about those things that you were kind of hiding from, and that you were ignoring those signs like that were popping up. What kind of were those signs that kind of made you think like, hey, maybe this is a problem? Nah, don't worry about it. But what were those things?
I avoid doing things that I don't want to do. A lot of those things are financial. One of the things that, I will sort of tell it here, here's your public service announcement of the day. If you don't pay your taxes, eventually the CRA is going to come after you. And they're serious when they tell you that they're going to come after you. And initially you can kind of ignore their annoying phone calls until you start getting taken to court by the government of Canada. And all of a sudden you have to start getting lawyers and start taking things seriously. So just dealing with financial things in my life and procrastinating away and figuring that I could just avoid them became a bigger and bigger thing. And those problems never went away. They just snowballed and went worse, and got worse. I would avoid uncomfortable situations in relationships. If people were causing, what I called being sort of too much drama, I would just eliminate those people from my life, and just sort of move on to people who weren't going to make things difficult for me. My actual, sort of the drinking really started getting worse. So my first real problem was with food. I had gastric bypass surgery, and one of the things when you have that is you have to go through a series of psychological tests and examinations, because they're concerned that you're just going to trade one addiction for another. I was smart enough to just blow my way through all those interviews by giving them the answers they wanted. And then, strangely enough, 2 years after my gastric bypass surgery, because I wasn't able to eat my feelings away, I found myself in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, because my alcohol use had ramped up to the point where it was it was no longer sustainable, and I had sort of finally found the bottom.
So what did a day in, Paul's active alcoholism look like at the end?
Yeah. So at the end, and it's, even today, sort of looking back, I have a hard time of, like, somebody said, well, when did it start? And I really don't know. It was during COVID. And it was a very rapid progression, but I can look at the progression that it used to, sort of, it moved from drinking Thursday, Friday, Saturday to drinking, sort of Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then I said, well, at least you're not a daily drinker. But very quickly I was a daily drinker. and my starting time started moving up and up. I work as a consultant. I was spending a lot of time during COVID as on Zoom calls with clients, and I used to start my drinking because it was COVID and sort of everybody was isolating. I was home alone, and so I would start drinking in the evening, but then it dawned on me that nobody knew what was in the coffee cup I was drinking on a Zoom call. And if I started drinking at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I could probably get to the end of my calls at the end of the day and not, I could still sort of hold it together for a couple of hours, and then but I'd get a head start on drinking the way that I wanted to drink. And so the starting time started creeping up and up. I started seeing physical symptoms. One of the things that they tell you when you have gastric bypass surgery is that you really have to avoid ulcers, because one of the results of the surgery is your stomach is much smaller than it normally is. And at that time, I was drinking about a 26 a day at least, and pouring that much alcohol into a surgically reduced stomach. I was vomiting blood every morning in the shower, and that started freaking me out. So the only way I could get through the day and actually be able to go to work and function on calls during the day was to rig up a system with a mason jar and a lid and a hole punched in the mason jar with a straw, so I could have a bourbon on ice in the shower to chill me out enough that I could function during the day, so that then I can start drinking, because I'd throw up in the shower and I'd get upset that I was sick and that I was going to die. And the only way that I could make those feelings go away was to pour more alcohol on them. And it just became a cycle. And the cycle just got, the decline just got steeper and steeper and steeper until I kind of, crashed into a big, in my mind, I see it as a sort of a smoking hole in the middle of the desert with I just sort of spiraled a fire jet right into the desert floor, because that decline was very rapid, and I couldn't really do anything about it.
Was there a time you didn't think you were going to make it out alive?
At the very end, I remember thinking that the best answer for everybody would be as if I just died. I have 3 children. I knew I was failing them as a father, and so I thought the best answer is if I die, then nobody will have to deal with me, and they can collect the insurance money, and they can go on. But I couldn't kill myself. So what I tried to do was kill myself. I was killing myself a little bit at a time, because I knew that I was physically getting sicker. The effects of alcohol were getting, sort of my health was declining. And at the very end, my first thought when I'd wake up every morning was, damn it, you didn't die. You got to do this for another 24 hours. And I started, sort of going to sleep, praying that I was going to die in my sleep so that the pain would stop. And everybody would be done with me, and there could be an insurance settlement, and then everybody could move on. But unfortunately, I've proven somewhat difficult to kill, because I kept, I must be here for, I do believe that I'm here for some broader purpose, and there's a reason for all of this, and that purpose, sort of and that reason is the reason I'm still walking around today. Because I just wanted to die at the very end, but I couldn't bring myself to kill myself.
Did anyone around you try to intervene at the time, like friends, family, coworkers?
No one knew. One of the beauties of being an alcoholic in the middle of COVID was I was self-isolating, and so I was being socially responsible. So I was living at home with one of my sons. He's but sort of 20-year-old males have unless you exist in the kind of the 3 feet directly around them. He was sort of doing his thing, I was doing my thing, and I was managing to keep the outside parts of my life together. I remember when I told my family that I was in the program and that I was seeking help for my addiction, my sister turned to me and said, "But yeah, like you drink, but you're not an alcoholic." What she didn't understand is that at family functions, I would pre-drink before we went. I would drink at the family function, and then when I couldn't take the voices running around in my head screaming, I would, sort of find some reason to leave, and then I would go home and drink the way I wanted to drink. And you know, so nobody knew. Work didn't know, because the one thing that I was still hanging on to was performing at work. And in fact, I mean, some people I think might have suspected, because there were, like, I remember I had a client at the time. I would come home on a Friday night, and because I wouldn't be able to sleep, I would stay up. I'd open a bottle of bourbon, and I'd just start writing reports or doing analysis for clients. I'd send emails to my team like at 2:00 in the morning on Sunday morning. They finally, I was, they finally told me I had to stop sending emails in the middle of the night. But I had a client who actually sort of assessed the quality of my work on a sliding bourbon scale of how many drinks they thought I had, because the more I drank, I could get in that sweet spot where everything was, everything I said was brilliant, and all my analysis was insightful, and I could sort of hang on to it. And when I started noticing that sort of, before it descended into gibberish, I could send stuff out. And so, like, a really good report to this client was a 3 bourbon report. And we openly joked about, how many bourbons I had on the weekend before I did a presentation for them. I got a massive raise and salary increase in active addiction, because the only thing that in my life that was giving me any kind of satisfaction was work. And so I was putting all my energies into that and drinking. And so it wasn't until, sort of things started unraveling for me. And we can, sort of talk about sort of like, finding the bottom. But like up until the moment when that happened, as far as the outside world was concerned, I was fine.
So what was that bottom? What was the part where you're like, I can still put this show on for as long as I need to. Obviously things at work are going well, things with your family, you're isolating, so it didn't really matter. But like, there was a moment for you where you had to say, hey, listen, like, I can't keep doing this because.
Yeah. So I, I hit my bottom on the Sunday night. So May 9th, my sober date is a Monday. On the Sunday night before, my eldest son was home. His brothers, it was May, so everybody was home from school. My other 2 sons I don't know where they were, but they weren't home. And I just remember my eldest son and I were we were gonna have dinner, and we were gonna talk. He was just starting first year university. We were going to talk about university. He was moving. He was going to move away, and we were going to have a conversation around the school year and moving away from home, and sort of his future. And I was really looking forward to it. I remember I had a drink while I was making dinner. I remember I had a drink during dinner, and that's the last thing I remember. I woke up at 4:00 in the morning with an empty gin bottle at my feet and a broken mason jar. I had started drinking out of mason jars by that point, because I was falling asleep while I was drinking and I kept breaking glasses. And so I pivoted over to mason jars because they're hard to break. And when you break 12 of them, you just go to Canadian Tire and buy another 12 and you're sort of good to go again. So I like my cupboard was just full of mason jars because I had broken most of the glasses. And I woke up at 4:00 in the morning, and I had realized that just the way that the living room is positioned, my son would have had to have stepped over my slumped over body to go to bed. And even now, like the sense of disappointment in myself that I had let him down. I was letting everybody down in my life. I was letting myself down. I couldn't keep doing that anymore. And so I knew absolutely nothing about AA. Other than what you see in movies and TV shows. and I Googled AA meetings in South Mississauga. It was the rooms were just beginning to open up after COVID, and this was a Monday, and I found an in-person meeting that night near my house. And that was my first meeting. And that meeting is kind of which is now my home group. But that was kind of like, that was the end for me. Again, sort of, it was just sort of, I couldn't deal with being so without hope. Like, the despair was just more than I could take, and just, I couldn't keep letting everybody down. I couldn't keep letting myself down. And that was kind of the end. I'm one of the ones who came in and never left. For whatever reason, sort of, I managed to sort of to sort of go. That was my first meeting, and that's kind of where I've been since.
Tell me a little bit about early recovery. Do you remember what day one looked like?
I remember. So I sort of talked about that first meeting. So it's a big meeting. I remember I rolled up to the meeting, and there was like 8 guys, sort of, and I knew nothing about 12-step programs. Now I know that if you drive by a church and there's a bunch of people drinking Tim Hortons coffee and smoking cigarettes out of the church, that there's some kind of meeting happening there. Like that now, I drive by somewhere and I go, oh, there must be a meeting in that. There's some kind of meeting in that church. I drove up and I went, oh, okay, 8 guys. It'll be, I guess this will be okay. And I walked into a massive room in the bottom of a church, and there were like 40 people there, and they were all smiling and they were all laughing. And I thought I was sort of holding things together, but I sort of now know when I see a newcomer coming in the room that I had like newcomer stink all over me. Like, I was wearing a hoodie. The hoodie was up. My eyes were down. I couldn't look people in the eye. I sat in the back. I did all of the newcomer things. I remember not being able to go up and get my desire chip. And one of the members in the room, the first person I met in AA, took me by the hand and walked me to the front to get my desire chip at that meeting. I don't remember an awful lot about that meeting. He told me, we were sort of sitting talking, and he said, the good news is you don't ever have to drink again. He said, he advised me to do 90 meetings in 90 days and just, sort of not drink. And that's what I did. Luckily, where I live in Mississauga, there are a ton of meetings. And so I was able to, just go to a meeting a day, and sort of hang on. And that 1 hour meeting became the only moment of serenity in my life, because, my life without alcohol started being pretty intolerable. I couldn't deal with all the emotions. I couldn't deal with all the thoughts running through my head. I couldn't deal with everything that was going on without any kind of relief. But I knew that if I could get to the end of the day and get to a meeting, there'd be a little bit before, and then the meeting, and then a little bit after, and then I could go to sleep. And at least, I would just remember starting to count down and going, okay, 2 hours and you can leave for the meeting, 1 hour and you can leave for the meeting, and then go to the meeting, and I could turn my phone off, and I could sit and I could listen, and it was the only peace that I got. And that was sort of how I held it together for the first little while. Everybody advised me. There's again, I'm blessed to be part of a community. There was somebody. She was one of the first people that I was introduced to at an AA meeting, and I would see her at all the other meetings, and she would say hi to me, and the first thing she'd say, have you got a home group yet? Have you got a sponsor? I thought that she had been assigned to me to follow me around to make sure I was sticking in the program, because I was just that important, right? And so, I didn't know that sort of people go to other meetings for themselves as opposed to for me. And so I remember thinking, I thought that she had somehow been personally assigned to me. Don't ask me how she was tracking my. I don't know where I thought the chip was, but because she was everywhere. But she, eventually, because I got tired of telling her that no, I don't have a home group and I don't have a sponsor. I found a home group. I found a sponsor. But more importantly, I found a group of guys who have become the cornerstone of my sobriety. I was incredibly alone in early sobriety, and I was blessed to have found a group of guys who became my friends, who are still my friends, who are still sort of some of the closest people to me, who I can depend on, and a lot of them, we all, many of us have sort of similar sobriety dates. So we were all kind of in the same place, and we were kind of doing the same. We were going through the same sort of things, and having them around. I don't know that I would have been sober without sort of like finding that tribe of guys to sort of hang around with and be part of, and to learn and grow with in sobriety.
What does sobriety look like for you now with your family relationships? Because I know that, a very important part of, the why moment of like kind of why you got sober was, when you were passed out and your son had to kind of step over you to go to bed, and he said, this can't happen anymore. How have your relationships with your family and your sons have changed?
Good. It's funny. So I didn't tell anybody that I was going to a meeting until after I went, and I was probably going to meetings for at least a week, I think, before I told anybody, where I would just disappear for an hour, and then come back. And I eventually started telling some people in my life, but it was my one of my children said to me, he said, "So Dad, let me get this straight. The things that you used to drink to avoid are still all out there happening." And I went, yeah. Because, at that point, I wasn't working the steps. I wasn't working the program. I was still dealing with all of the craziness that was going on in my head. But he said, "But you can't drink to get away from it anymore." And I went, "No." And he goes, "It must really suck to be you right now." And that's, sort of what it was like. So, I believe that one of the reasons why fate has decided that this is the path that I'm on is to show them, show my sons that there is another option for them. I look at them and see bits of myself in them. I hear them say things like, if people just did what I need them to do, everything would be okay. And why don't people just do what I need them to do when I need them to do it? And I sort of see those things, and I smile and I go, "Oh, that's, that's right. Like, that's right out of the big book," and doing those things. And so I think my relationship with my sons is better because I'm trying to use the lessons that I'm learning to help them. I am more present in trying to be more present in the lives of my family. I was an absent uncle to my niece and nephew. I would show up at things, but I was never there. I was physically present, but I wasn't emotionally present. And so I'm trying to be there for now. I'm trying to be a better brother. I'm working, sort of came in with the, sort of as a divorced man in AA, I can, sort of run off a long list of resentments about my ex-wife, but, we are, I think, sort of we're in a place where we have a relationship where we're both focused on trying to sort of raise our, co-parent our children and get to a place where I'm just sort of letting go of a lot of those feelings. So I'm present, I think, is probably, if you wanted to sort of sum up, I'm present in people's lives anymore instead of just kind of physically being around.
Sure. And are there any, like, I guess, big triggers or anything that you kind of have right now in terms of, like, maybe not, triggers to drinking or using or anything like that, but maybe triggers to thinking the way you were thinking, the selfishness, the not being present?
Yeah, I still get wrapped up in my own head. I still prioritize the immediate over the important. You know, that you know, sort of I when I forget first things first, things start going sideways. You know, I've had ups and downs. I've gone through periods where I've been, you know, sort of not going to meetings on a regular basis, where I've been, you know, sort of isolating myself from people, where I haven't really been working the program on a and trying to be, you know, sort of good at that. But then I see, you know, when I see that backslide happening, I'm able to stop myself and remind myself that, you know, it's a pretty simple, you know, it's a pretty simple series of steps to get back on track. Start going, you know, start going to meetings again. Start being present, and when you really start feeling, you know, sorry for yourself, phone somebody else and talk to another alcoholic, because, you know, talking about their problems makes my problems go away. So yeah, I still get wrapped up in my own self-important little thoughts, but then when I catch myself, I can start doing something to sort of get out of that bad place.
So you touched on it briefly of a few things that you do, but like, are there any other like rituals or routines or things that you do on a daily, monthly, weekly, hourly basis to kind of keep yourself grounded?
Yeah, I start my day with prayer, meditation, and reading. Try and get connected. I do around a 10 to 15-minute guided meditation. I do some readings. I have a couple of prayers. You know, like I kind of start out my day, because mornings are the one thing that I can control. I get up before anybody else is awake, and sort of do those things. I go to, you know, sort of around 4 meetings a week, sometimes more, sometimes less. Um, I try and sort of stay connected in service. I do some things with some groups out, you know, within the program around sort of organizing events and stay active and try and be kind of present and working on service.
What's one truth that sobriety's taught you?
Um, there is no weakness in asking for help. You know, I grew up being told that a man stands on his own 2 feet, right? You know, like, the cowboy, you know, Clint Eastwood standing at the end of the, you know, at the end of the end of the street in a Western, you know, by himself. You know, a man stands alone with his problems. I tried to fix my own problems for most of my life, and all I did was create a big pit of crap that I have to deal with. But you know, there is understanding that you can ask for help and help will be given is a strength, not a weakness.
That's awesome. I agree. And I think I struggle with that as well. Right. I don't know if it's a guy thing, you know, that we just have this like, you know, overarching like be a man.
Well, and that's, yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not blaming my dad, because he brought me up the best way that he knew how. But there was you know, that when I was growing up, you know, men don't cry. I remember I was upset about something and I started crying, and he said, tears aren't going to solve anything. Men, you know, like, men stand up. Right. And so there was, like, I grew up in that culture. And again, that's just, you know, that was the way things were. And so, like, that was the kind of the environment. And so, like, you suffered alone and you suffered in silence, and you did what you had to do, and you met your responsibilities. That's what you did. And, you know, sort of when it became clear to me that I couldn't solve my own problems, because you know, if I could have solved my problems with addiction, I would have, but I couldn't. But with the help of others, I was able to find a solution to stay sober. And so, you know, I think that's sort of the powerful message, and it's sort of say, listen, you know, like, surrendering is not a bad thing, right? Surrendering is just deciding that you're not going to fight anymore, and that you're going to just sort of get on with it. So,
Mr. Paul, what does living sober mean to you today?
living sober. So living sober means dealing with, there is still what I call the emptiness that exists in my soul that for a long time I covered up with things on the outside, right? I covered it up with food, and I covered it up with alcohol. I covered it up with other drugs. I covered it up with relationships. I covered it up with shopping. The number of times I've decided that everything in my life would be okay if I just ordered that new stainless steel panini press from Amazon and have it magically arrive, and everything in my life would be all right. And Amazon's great because they're like a drug dealer, right? Like you order from it, and and later on that day, the package arrives. It's perfect. It's dealing with that, dealing with all of those feelings and all that emptiness on the inside, because the only, I've come to realize that the only permanent solution to fixing that hole inside of me is from within. That people, places, and things on the outside are temporary, and they end up not working. And so sobriety means like trying to find the happiness and the self-satisfaction from the inside to deal with all of the sort of the emotions and thoughts and negative thinking.
So if you could tell your younger self one thing, what would that be?
That you're going to be okay. That everything is going to be okay, and that there's a plan. And you might not know what the plan is, but there is a plan and a purpose, and it's going to be okay. Because I spend so much time trying to manipulate things to get to an outcome that I think I want, and then when I get to that outcome, I realize it's not enough. To just understand that it's going to be all right, I think would be it.
I love it, Paul. Thanks.
All right,
It's
thank
been
you.
good. I got to ask you this one question just to keep in line. If sobriety was a soundtrack to you, what song would be on it?
So there's the song that I listened to a lot. I still listen to it. I'm Not All Right by Jelly Roll. I think sort of if there was a soundtrack from like my first year in sobriety that, I'm definitely not okay. When people ask you how you are and they say, yeah, I'm good, and you know that they're lying, that things aren't good, is, I'm not all right, but everything's going to be okay. I think that'd be it for me.
That's a good song. I know exactly what you're talking about. Thanks for coming on, Paul. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Drew, man. Love you, man.
There you go. Well, that's another story on the Sober Tapes. See, these aren't just interviews. They're reminders that recovery is possible, even when you're in the darkest of places. So until next time, let's keep the tape rolling, keep moving forward.